Welcome to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. I love giving you updates on what's happening with the While We're Waiting ministry, but this week there's not much to update. Due to the crazy winter weather over the last couple of weeks, we've had to postpone or reschedule 2 of our events. This week, Lord willing, we'll be getting back on track with a While We're Waiting weekend at the home of Rex and Mary Jones in Gilbert, Arizona, and a While We're Waiting mini retreat for moms at the Refuge in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I will be at the moms event, and I'm looking forward to meeting these dear ladies and hearing about their children. On today's episode of the podcast, my guest is Kristi Miller. Her story is one marked by profound loss and deep faith. Before the death of her son, PK, Kristi had already walked through significant grief, including the sudden loss of her husband just 22 months earlier. In this first half of our 2-part conversation, Kristi invites us into her story, her life, her family, the losses that reshaped everything she thought she knew about God, and the raw, honest wrestling that followed. This is a conversation about shock and sorrow, about being shaken to the core, and about crying out to God when the words are gone and all that remains is grief. Kristi shares openly about the day her son died, the long road of trauma and healing that followed, and the slow, grace-filled journey of learning how to live and trust again. This episode holds space for lament, for unanswered questions, and for the hard truth that faith doesn't keep us from suffering, but it does meet us in the middle of it. As you listen, I hope you'll feel seen, understood, and gently reminded that even when God feels far away, He has not abandoned you. Here is part 1 of our conversation, and we'll continue Kristi's story in part 2 next week. Hi, Kristi. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. What a joy.
Oh, it's a joy for me as well. Let's get started by giving you the opportunity to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Okay. Well, I grew up in North Dakota, about an hour from Canada. Pretty traditional family, mom and dad and a brother and sister. When I graduated from high school, I went to Minnesota and got my undergraduate work there with emotional behavioral disorders. And I moved to Northeast Arkansas after I graduated from college. And I have been in Arkansas for many years now and met my husband here. And we got married and had 3 children. And life was kind of, I guess, how people would say predictable at that point. We're having our kids were very involved in activities and different things, so we were busy and running around. And things have changed quite a bit in my life since those days. But I would say now that the Lord has done a lot of work in me through these years, and I'm thankful for His ability to redeem pain and bring healing and comfort.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, Arkansas is a lot different from northern North Dakota, isn't it?
It is, yes. It was an hour from Canada. So I still, even though I've been here many years, when the meteorologist says bitter cold, I still get the giggles because I'm like, no.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I grew up in northern Wisconsin, at least until I was 12 before we moved to Arkansas. So not quite as far north as you did, but yeah, bitter cold means something completely different
That's
here
right.
than it does up there for sure. But we love Arkansas. We enjoy living here. So as my listeners know, this podcast is focused on child loss, which you have experienced yourself, and we're going to talk about that. But the loss of your son wasn't your first experience with grief. Talk about that.
My first very significant experience with grief is when my grandma, and when I was 16 years old, hung herself. And my family and I went through a lot of things with suicide. And so that was my first big experience with grief. And like I said, I was just 16. So I dealt with things like fear that other people, when they were upset, that they were going to. I struggled with just visually picturing things, even though I didn't see anything. I struggled with some anger because I saw how my dad and my grandpa were hurting in a way that I couldn't even imagine. And so the Lord did a lot of healing in us through that and came to understand when somebody gets to that point, the amount of hurt that they're going through. And so I would say that, that was my first real significant experience. And then my husband and I had been married for 18 years, and we had 3 children at that time. Our kids were 16, 14, and 11. And he was in just a freak accident. He was outside at work. He fell. He hit his neck on a railroad tie that they were using for landscaping, was immediately paralyzed from the chest down. He was airback to Memphis. And at that point, they had told us that the paralysis was permanent. We were surrounded by his family and my family and friends for 4 days in trauma ICU. And everyone was praying for a miracle and hoping for that. He was in excruciating pain. Every day, the doctors were trying to get him stabilized because they wanted to be able to do a surgery. They didn't believe that the surgery was going to correct his paralysis, but they did think that maybe it would provide him a little relief from the pain. And so they actually had him to a point on Sunday morning, which was the 14th of August, where they thought that they could do it. And so they took him in, and that was the last time we saw him. He died in pre-op. He had vomited into his lungs, and they couldn't recover him.
Wow.
So it was a terrible 4 days and was a shocking outcome for myself and my 3 kids.
Sure. How did your husband's death impact your faith walk?
I was struggling. I was very caught off guard. I didn't expect at that age to be a young widow and then suddenly a single mother.
Yes.
I was, I guess the best way to describe is not feeling taken care of by the Lord. I thought, wait a minute, I didn't think this was going to happen. Right. And just, we run into those things in our lives that are very unexpected and traumatic. And then we have work to do in our hearts and minds after the fact. And then I also had things to work through with my children. So they were not at the hospital when he died. They were on their way. My parents had come and were driving them there because I didn't want them to have to sit through the hours of surgery. I thought if they could sleep that morning, my parents bring them over. So once they got over, then I had to share the news with them that their dad had died. And that was just probably the most awful thing in my life at that point, I would say.
Sure. Yeah. Because he's going into surgery and you think this is going to be an improvement. This is going to give him some quality of life. Things are going to be better from here on out.
Some relief.
And to have
yes,
that outcome. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's devastating.
Mm-hmm.
So as you said, you had 3 children at the time of your husband's death. PK was your oldest, 16-year-old son, and then you had your daughters. We do want to focus the rest of our conversation today about PK and his story. So I want to invite you to tell us a little bit about him. Help us get to know him a little bit.
Well, he was my first child, as you said, and just joy in my life. Very energetic, very social. So I took him with me everywhere. And so just from the time he was little, he thought everyone was his friend. I remember we were at a park one time and he was just maybe 3. And this whole bus full of preschoolers pulled up. He'd never met them, just went and shook their hands, introduced himself to everyone, then organized them all into becoming that they were on a ship and he was the captain. And he just was very social and very energetic. And he stayed that way his whole life. He was very involved with sports. He grew fast. A lot of people, so he was very involved with football and basketball at his school, and was a lot of people, because he grew so fast, thought that our small town recruited him and brought him in to play football from Texas, which we always thought that was so funny that people would think an elementary school kid would be brought in from somewhere. But just a very energetic personality, was often the team leader, would lead his teams in prayers, would after he had died and they did scholarships in his honor, they called him the ambassador. And that really described his personality, because he was very much an ambassador, they said, for his school and his community. And he loved the Lord. He loved his family. He loved everyone. I miss him so much. He was such a joy.
Yeah,
His
sounds
joy.
like an amazing kid. I can see why you said the first word you used to describe him was joy.
Oh yeah.
And yes, I love
Yeah.
that. That's
Mhm.
wonderful.
Mhm.
So, talk about what happened to PK in the summer of 2013, just less than 2 years after your husband had died.
Yes. Yeah. It had been 22 months, and so as a single mom, I was trying to coordinate everything between
Sure.
activities and all the things, and working full time. And so I was supposed to go pick up my girls from a volleyball camp, and it was at a school that we went to all the time because it was in our conference. And I could not because of some people that had come into work. So I asked my son. He was 18 at the time. He'd driven many times on that road. So I was like, "Can you go pick up your sisters?" And he was going to have a day off of work, so he thought that sounded great. He'll do
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
So he was leaving in the morning. The road where he was going to be driving, I knew was not good as far as cell phone signal and stuff. And so when he was supposed to get there, I was hearing from the girls that he hadn't made it. And so I was trying to find him. And this was quite a long process because I was calling his cell phone, nobody was answering. But for me, because of the road and the signal thing, I thought perhaps he was just in a bad signal spot. But then I started getting messages from people in the community. Is everything okay? Is everything okay, Kristi? And I thought, well, this is really odd. And later I found out it's because they knew what happened to my son before I did. And
Oh,
because
wow.
people had seen the accident in the community. And so word was spreading quickly. So I was calling and calling. I started calling police departments because I started thinking, well, maybe there was an accident. And so I was trying to think of different places along the road that perhaps there would have been, somebody who would know something. And I kept getting the runaround and eventually got told to call the state police. So then I called the state police, and then they kept telling me that I was kind of frozen at my desk at work. I knew I kept having a worse and worse feeling. Something's wrong, but I didn't know what. I wasn't at that point at all grasping that he had died. I was thinking that he had been an accident, and I was trying to figure out where so that I could go to where he was. And the state police kept trying to get me to go home. They were telling me to go home. By this time, I had two people that had come into my office, and both friends of mine and coworkers. And the one knew the state police who I was in contact with. So he, behind the scenes, was talking to him. He knew that my son had died. His job was to try to get me home as well. I wasn't cooperating because I wasn't understanding that my son had died. By this point, I had called my sister in law and asked her if she could go get the girls. I said, I don't know what's wrong, but something's wrong. Will you go get them? So she started driving there. And I just kept searching, and the state police called again. They're like, could you just go to your house? And I just wanted to go to where he was. I was like, if you could just tell me which hospital, if you could tell me where he is, I just want to go there. And then my one friend took the phone and he talked to him again, and then he hung up and he was just looking at me, and then it just hit me. I said, "Is he dead?" And then he never answered, but he just dropped his head, and then I knew. So then all I could think of is I have to get to my daughters. I have to. They've already had their dad die just not even 2 years, and so then two of the people said that they would drive me to my daughters. And during that time, my two daughters were contacting me, Mom, what's going on? What's happening? And I was trying very hard to not tell them over the phone. I wanted to be in person with them. Um, so I was trying to stall. I was like, oh, I think there's been an accident. I'm coming to you. I'm going to be there soon, just trying to get to them. In the meantime, I called my mom and my mother in law. I remember just sobbing, saying, I just want my son. And I remember telling my mom that my son had died. And I remember hearing her screams. I just set the phone down over there and just listened to her scream because I didn't even know what to say. And then I did the same thing with my mother in law. It was the same reaction, just listening to them screams. At one point, I remember as we were going down the road, we saw them bringing the UPS truck that had hit my son. And I heard the two men in front who were driving me say, "Oh, that was the truck." What? I just
Wow. Mm-mm.
couldn't even grasp all that was happening. So then my daughters saw on social media that my son had died. People were already posting pictures of him and talking about how he was going to be an angel and how much they would miss him. And so I remember getting this picture of him from my daughter and said, "Is he dead?" And that was just horrific to
Wow.
me because I hadn't even
Yes.
made it to them. And the amount of pain they already had with their dad dying and now their brother. And I was in such a state of shock, I couldn't even really think. I just remember sobbing, saying, "I want my son, just want my son." And then we got with the girls, and then they drove us home. And there were a bunch of people at our house. The basketball team was all sitting on the floor of our living room, just sitting there looking at me. And I remember just hugging them all, but I didn't know what to say, or I couldn't even think. So I just don't even remember who all was there. I know some of my friends had come too. It was such a horrific shock that I wasn't even thinking right.
Right. Was it helpful to you to have all of those people in your home, or did that just make it more difficult to have to deal with all of that at once?
I don't feel like I really dealt with much of it. I remember,
Yeah.
I guess because it was my son's friends, just seeing them.
Mm.
And that was comforting to me throughout, his, what would have been his senior year. I would go to their stuff and cheer him on and in honor of my son.
Sure.
And so I remember there was a time that I just went and laid in my son's bed. People were still there. I remember some women were standing there looking at me. I remember one lady came and laid beside me, and I remember whispering to some of the other people, "Can you please have her move?" I was uncomfortable. I was like, "No."
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, the fact that people were there was good, as far
Sure.
as I knew they loved us. I know it was good for my daughters. Their friends were all there, and my daughters appreciated that very much. But I was just in such a state of shock.
Yeah.
And I ended up going and meeting with the state police because I wasn't at the accident. So I wanted to know what exactly happened because the rumors were flying around the community. Um, there was even some nurse that I don't even know that was going around telling people she was at the scene of the accident. She was saying, "Oh, I just saw blood going everywhere. I saw this, I saw that." And when I was talking to the state police, they said it wasn't even true. She wasn't even there. They said sometimes people just insert themselves into the story for some reason. And but what the state police told me is my son was encountered a sunburst of rain, and he hydroplaned, and when he hydroplaned, he overcorrected. So he was going down the highway sideways. And then there was a curve coming the opposite direction where a UPS truck was coming. And the UPS truck saw my son's car and tried to get over, but he just couldn't in time. And so I guess they called T-boned him, and
Mm.
they think he was dead instantly. So,
Mm.
but then the car was so smashed all around him that it took a while for them to find his wallet and different identifying things. And so that was part of the delays I learned later too, because they were trying to have a positive identification of him before they
Sure.
told me that he had died. But I didn't know that stuff was going on or even understand the processes at that.
Right. Your story is so different from mine in that our daughter had cancer. And so we walked out this year-long journey. And, I can't imagine just a normal day. You're at work, everything is normal. Your daughters are at volleyball camp. You've got a plan. You're going to, and then for something like that to happen, I just can't imagine what that experience was like for you.
It definitely had a lot of effects too. Weird things would happen to me, like when I would pass a UPS truck, because I wasn't at the scene of the accident. When I would pass the UPS truck, I would hear a crash in my mind. It
Mm,
was the
yeah.
craziest thing that
Yeah.
happened for a while. When I would drive by the place where he was killed, I would shake, I would cry. It would take me a while to just be able to drive by there without having reaction, probably several years where I could drive by calmly. Took me a while.
And that's probably an area that you have to drive through frequently?
Not anymore, but I did at that time because my girls, just like my son, were very involved with sports and activities, and going to that school was something very common for us. So they were both in volleyball and basketball. And then I spoke at my son's funeral, and I committed to his friends that I was going to come cheer them on for him and me. And so I was still going to all of his stuff too.
Wow. That's
For
very
that
brave of
senior
you
year.
because that's hard.
It's hard.
Very hard. So, what were your conversations with God like in the aftermath of that accident?
I remember the first night very distinctly because I remember after everybody had left, now not my daughter's friends, they were with them, and that was very helpful to my girls. I remember that they just felt kind of surrounded and they needed to feel surrounded. So I remember that night checking and knowing that they were okay. And I remember going into my room and closing my door. And I remember I was just on the floor, fetal position, sobbing. Where are you,
Yeah,
God? Where are you? Why
sure.
aren't you taking care of us? I just felt just um, abandoned. I felt forgotten. And it's when I talk to people about this now, I'm always like, it's so crazy because I know as a woman of faith, anyone who would have asked me before the death of my husband and son, if they would have said, Kristi, do bad things happen? I would have said, yeah, they do. We're in a broken, bleeding world. They happen. There is hurt and pain and suffering in this world. I knew it in my head, but for some reason, I never expected,
Yes,
especially my son,
right.
to have my son die and bury him. That just, I had a favorite verse before the deaths, and people would always ask me, and I'd say, Psalm 16:8, I have set the Lord always before me, therefore I will not be shaken. I used to quote it all the time. I thought it was such a great verse. I'm like, yes, Jesus is in front of me, and I'm not going to be shaken. And then I remember after my son died, I remember people saying, Kristi, how are you? How do you feel? And I would say, shaken to my core.
Yes,
That was how I knew how to describe it. That's how I felt.
yes, yes. Yeah. So you find yourself shaken to the core and feeling like God has abandoned you.
Mm-hmm.
How did you work through that? Did it take a long time? Talk about that
Mm-hmm.
process.
Yeah, it was a process. It was a journey. It was not an event. It wasn't. I've had people say, "Well, what was the one thing that really was a turning point for you?" And there was not one thing. It was God by His grace and mercy walking with us, not leaving us. He had not abandoned me. I felt abandoned, but I was not abandoned. And I can look back and I can see all the different ways in His love and grace and mercy that He provided and blessed and helped the girls and I, strengthened us, and brought us along that journey. But it was a journey. And people would say, well, Kristi, just trust in the Lord and you're going to be fine. And I remember saying, well, I thought I was, and now I don't really know how to because I just felt so lost. And I know that the Lord was helping me through it. I remember when I would wake up in the morning, and I believe this was the Holy Spirit. I would hear in my head, not audible, but I would just hear in my head, Kristi, your good girls deserve your best just as much as PK did. And I knew that was truth. And I would just, and I don't think it was me because I
Right.
was so messed up. I think it was just the Lord just reminding me, you have these two girls, and so, no, and even if I wouldn't have had any other children because I was still here, I know God still had purpose for me. But when we're in the midst of that suffering and pain and trauma like we never imagined, it's hard to see our purpose because we can't understand what's happening. It doesn't make sense in our heads. It will never make sense to me why my son died at 18.
Right.
People will say, well, are you better now? And I just say things like, well, especially if they have children, I'll ask them, I'll say, well, if your child wasn't here, would you miss
Uh-huh.
them less? Would you love
Right.
them less? You would
Right.
miss them. You would love them forever. I will miss and love my son forever. He will always be my first child. He will always be my only son. He will always be my boy, and that will never change. And so, because of that, there will always be grief that will be there, but it's not the same as it was then, and we have to
Yeah.
fight little things. People will say, well, with time, it'll get better. And it's not the fact that time passes. If we don't do anything in that time, nothing's going to get better. I've heard before, I might have even read it in a book where somebody said, think of a flat tire. Time can pass, and if you don't do anything to the tire, if you don't give it air, nothing's going to change. It's going to sit
That's
there
right.
flat. And we're the same way. We
Yeah.
need to be crying out to the Lord and depending on Him. Um, I like the word lament because
Yes.
it's all through the Bible, and it's crying out to the Lord in our pain and in our trauma, and because He helped me to come to Him. Now, not always. There were days I was running away. I thought, I don't even know what to say. I don't know how to process this. I don't know how to come to peace with this. And me coming to peace with what has happened in my life, which it's been, a lot of years now. My son died in June 2013. So the Lord has done a lot of work in me through those years. If you would have been talking to me in 2014, you would have had a very
Right.
different conversation
That's right.
from
Yep.
where I am now because of His grace and love for me and help.
Yes.
And some days
Yes.
that's all I knew to say. Some days that was my only thing. Help. That's all I knew to say. Help me, Jesus. Help me.
Yes.
And
And
He
he always
has.
would, didn't he? Yeah. Yeah.
He has. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. He is faithful to do that.
Yes.
You've mentioned a couple of things already. You've gone through two very profound losses, and I know you've probably had a lot of things said by well-meaning people that were not
Mm-hmm.
helpful, and you've already
Mm-hmm.
mentioned a couple of those. How have you dealt with that? The people who say, "Well, is it better now?" or
Well,
those kinds of
sometimes,
things.
yeah. And I think the further that I've gone down my journey, the more the Lord has helped me, the more He's helped me to have grace in that. Because a lot of times I think when we're told those things, it hurts our feelings because we feel the gap in what we're going through and what people understand. And when they say things like that, like, I miss the old you, or, where are you? You're not the same. And it's hard for them to understand that as parents who've had a child die, we're not the same. We're
No,
not the same. But that because things are different doesn't mean that it can't be good. It
that's
doesn't mean
right.
that we don't have purpose. I know that I have purpose. I know that God is using my story of pain and trauma to try to be a light for other people because of what I have walked through and what He's helped me with. Because a lot of times when we're in the midst of that deep pain, we don't even know how to hope. We don't know how to look ahead with excitement. Sometimes people just feel dread after their child dying. And so I think that, sometimes we who have walked this journey can then hold out hope for them when they can't. We can sing the songs for them when they can't. We can stand with them when they feel like falling. We can walk into church with them when they don't even want to be there and know that we've dealt with some of the same things.
Yes, that's beautiful.
I've learned, I think, by the grace of God to give them grace. And another thing that has helped me is to think of how I was before the death, things that I said to people, and I know that my intentions were to help. And so that's one of the things I had on repeat in my head when people would say crazy things. And I got all the usual crazy things and motivational sound bites, from He gives His toughest battles to His strongest soldiers, Kristi, things like that.
Right.
I
Which is
remember
such a ridiculous thing to say. Can we just stop and say what a ridiculous thing that is to
it is
say?
a ridiculous thing to say, and it's not even biblical truth. The
No,
Bible says,
no,
in our weakness, He is strong.
that's right.
So we are weak, we struggle, we hurt, and as parents who had a child die, we lament, we cry out to Him, we don't understand it, it doesn't make sense, but He can give us strength.
That's right. That's right.
So I try to have on repeat in my head, they mean well, because usually people do, and to give them grace, because I sure want grace in my life. And then the other thing that helps me is to think back to things I said before that I understood.
Right. And, another thing that helps me give grace to those people is to think they're brave. They at least said something,
That's right. That's
and
right.
I was the person before my loss that didn't say anything because I was so afraid of saying the wrong thing. I just didn't say anything, and I would avoid people. And I look back on that now and I think, wow, that was the wrong thing to do, just as wrong as saying the wrong thing, And yeah, so at least those folks do have courage. They're
That's right.
they're brave enough to try to say something.
They're trying. That's right.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, having grace is the most important thing in those kinds of situations for sure. So, have you found an answer that's comfortable for you when people say, "So how many children do you have?" Because women ask that of each other all the time. And so how do you handle that?
I always say I have 3 children, and when they ask, and then if they ask about where they are, then I always share that my son is in heaven and died when he was 18. So I made that decision early on that I was always going to say 3, because it happened to me pretty quickly where somebody was saying, "How many kids do you have?" And I was like, "Oh," and I thought, "Well, 3, because my son is still my son, even though he's not here." Just like the title, while I'm waiting to be with him
That's
again,
right.
He's still my son.
Friends, as we wrap up part 1 of my conversation with Kristi Kirk, I'm struck again by how honest she has been about fear, about unanswered questions, and about how it feels to be shaken to the core and still keep coming back to the Lord. In part 2, we'll continue this conversation and go even deeper into what healing can look like over time. Kristi shares very practical wisdom for those early days of grief, what it was like to walk through PK's senior year without him, and how our understanding of God's character has been rebuilt, slowly, faithfully, and with grace. We'll also talk about worship and music, what it means when you lose your song, and how it can return. So be sure to come back for part 2. And before we go, I'll remind you that you can find links in the show notes to connect with Kristi, along with a link to our private Facebook group, While We're Waiting, Support for Bereaved Parents. If you're longing for a community that understands and will point you toward hope, we'd love to welcome you. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.